And I remember reading a quote by Rupert Spira that said, you know, all of our suffering is contained within a single thought,
Hmm.
or contained within one thought.
I've never heard that, but I like that. Yeah.
And it was a powerful concept. And I think where that can seem so obvious, and even, you know, when you talk, Michael, I love, you know, how eloquent you are in explaining things through analogies and stories, and it can feel so simple, right? Be present, you know, be in the moment, and you know, allow the personal thinking mind to settle down, and new thought, new more supportive thought will likely come to the surface. But that, even how simple it can appear, and it is, it can also seem very challenging if, for instance, you are caught up in those moments of,
Yeah.
you know, challenge or adversity, or, you know, we touched upon grief or homelessness and all of these other challenges. So in those moments when it can be overwhelming, and you know, the tendency of our thinking patterns is more negative, is you know, thinking about all of the things that could go wrong and maybe going wrong, how in those moments can we connect to this innate nature? And that's a pretty big question, I realize that.
Well, but it's a good question because it's a question that a lot of people have. And I think the key to the answer is in recognizing the difference between learning through understanding, insight, seeing, and learning through information and concept and practice. So if you really get how something works, you will work with it as well as it can be worked with. If you understand the physics, you can do any kind of engineering. If you fundamentally misunderstand how something works, you can try and force yourself to do things the way that it looks like it works, but they don't have the same effect. There's a famous talk given by the physicist Richard Feynman, and he talked about the South Sea Islands cargo cults. And this was apparently a real thing after World War II. There were all these islands in the South Pacific that had briefly hosted um, American or Japanese armies. And the armies tended to actually be pretty generous with the natives because it was in their best interest to be. And so they would fly in and they would build runways, and they would leave food and clothes and all sorts of things, and then fly off. And of course, to the natives, they just thought the gods were descending from the sky in giant birds and giving them beneficence. And so for years after the armies had left, they would stand, and it was very ritualized, and they would stand on the dirt runways with sticks, doing what they saw the people doing, and coconuts on their ears like the headphones, and doing everything that they saw to call forth the god birds from the sky. Now, that actually makes total sense. We can look at it and we can go, oh, roll our eyes. But given what their misunderstanding of what was happening, that was a really clever response. Well, when we misunderstand where our experience comes from, where our sense of worry and panic comes from, where our well-being and creativity come from, we'll do a lot of stuff that doesn't work, but kind of looks like it does sometimes. So back to your question, how do you do that? If the secret is just be present and don't get too caught up in your thinking, you know, how do I do that? Well, if you see that the present moment is like a magic carpet, it will take you places. It is not a stagnant, still thing. You don't have to, okay, I'm present, now what? It actually is it's the most alive we ever are, is when we are fully in whatever we're in. It's why athletes love athleting. It's why musicians love musicking. It's why all of us love being so absorbed in something that we lose all sense of time and self. Well, that's portable. You can do that anywhere, anytime, if you understand that's what that is. But if you don't understand, then okay, how do I create this? I need to do this, and I need to practice this. That's hard, and I honestly don't know anybody. That's not quite true, but I don't know many people who can pull it off for any length of time. to make themselves present, to make themselves mindful, to make themselves not get caught up in their thinking. But if you get it, so here, this might be the simpler example. I was giving a talk once, and I was talking about this, and I talked about, I shared that sky and rain analogy, and somebody in the audience was very upset with me because they were obviously very in their head, and something they might have had horrible life circumstances. I have no idea, but they were essentially almost shouting at me, like, so you're saying that you know, even though all this stuff is happening, I'm still okay. So what about you? What happens to you when you know, what if you went out in the rain and you didn't have an umbrella and you didn't, and I just said to them, look, if I went out in the rain, I'd get wet, but it would be okay because I know I'd dry out, because that's how we're made. I know I'd warm back up because that fire is inside us. So in the same way, I don't necessarily love being wet, soaked through, chilled to the bone, but I know that I'll come back online. That's how we're made. I don't have to even do anything in order to do it. And so while it's still uncomfortable in the moment, it's not uncomfortable in the moment and miserable because of me projecting the moment into the future and assuming if I'm this wet now, imagine how wet I'm going to be by the time the quarantine's over, right? If it's this bad now, imagine how bad it's going to be. Well, yeah, that's a great way to make yourself miserable. Imagine how bad it's going to be by projecting the present into the future. It's not true. It's total make-believe, but it is within our capacity to do it if we don't understand that we're the ones doing it, right? So understanding, seeing something insightfully, that's why I'll come back to noticing. Just paying a little bit more attention than you usually do to what's going on inside you. And you'll start to see, because it's how we work, it's how we're made, and we are beautifully made. We are made for resilience. We are made for fresh starts. We are made to be as good as new. And that's kind of cool and comforting when you know it, when you see it for yourself. It's really, really comforting.